Okay, my friends, welcome back to the church. It's a good place to teach and talk about this wonderful new medicine. In fact, the Spanish call Dr. Hammer's new medicine La Medicina Sagrada, the sacred medicine. So we are in the right place for that. Before we start, I please ask you to read the disclaimer. While medicine as we know it is based on the concept that diseases are malfunctions or failure of the organism, that diseases are caused by pathogenic microbes, by malignant cancer cells, defective genes, or a weak immune system. And these are just the most prevalent theories. Then there are also the so-called risk factors believed to increase the chance of developing a disease. Risk factors such as a family history of the disease, toxins in our food, in our environment, smoking, electromagnetic pollutants, geopathic radiation, diet, nutritional deficiency, hormones or stress, and the list goes on. While for the most part of my life, I believed all that. And I was also scared. I was scared of getting cancer and that I would have to go through this. Mastectomy, radiation, chemo. But one day, all of this completely changed. In 1999, I was in Austria at the time. I was invited to a lecture about German new medicine. First, I was hesitant because the media kept reporting that this Dr. Hammer was a charlatan, a quack, a psychopath who denied his patients the standard treatment, particularly chemo. And this was also the reason why they had stripped him of his medical license. Yet, he continued to see patients. Eventually, I decided to go and form my own opinion. And there I sat, listening to the speaker. And I was in awe, to say the least. This was science at its best. Firmly anchored in the science of embryology, Dr. Hammer was able to explain the nature of diseases based on biological principles that apply to every human being and therefore to each patient's case. Founded on 5 biological laws, Dr. Hammer provided the scientific evidence that diseases are not, as assumed, errors of nature, but instead significant biological special programs of nature created to support an organism, humans, animals, plants, during unexpected distress, bringing to light that nature is not antagonistic and hostile, but that nature is caring, that nature is creative, and that the inherent force of nature is to protect its creation and to secure its survival. That is our survival, because we are part of nature. And it's one of my favorite quotes. This is how Dr. Hammer himself experienced his discovery. Finding the biological special programs of nature was indeed a revelation. Only life itself can write such a drama. Without the death of my son and my own subsequent cancer, the true nature of diseases would probably not have been discovered for many decades to come, because conventional medicine is moving away from the secret. So let's delve into the secret of the new medicine. And I will first summarize the 5 biological laws, so we have the basics for our special topic tonight. Well, the first biological law states that every disease originates from a biological conflict. A biological conflict differs from general stress, even from extreme stress, insofar as the distress, for example, the loss of a workplace, separation from a loved one, a cancer diagnosis, occurs entirely unexpected. From a biological point of view, unexpected implies that the situation could be detrimental for the one who was caught off guard. So in order to support the individual during such an unexpected and unforeseen crisis, and in order to facilitate a conflict resolution, a meaningful special biological program created exactly for that situation is instantly activated. And this biological program involves the psyche, the brain, and the organ. Based on the studies of tens of thousands of brain scans, Dr. Hammer discovered that a very specific type of conflict always impacts in the same area of the brain. On a brain scan, we see this impact as a sharp target ring configuration. Here we have an example. Dr. Hammer further found that it is exactly this brain relay from where the disease and also the disease symptoms are controlled. So let's look at the example we have here. In this, on this CT scan, we see the impact of a conflict in the area of the brain that is called the motor cortex. The motor cortex controls our muscle movements. The biological conflict linked to the muscle is not being able to escape, not being able to run away, feeling tied down, feeling stuck, causing muscle paralysis. As we see, for example, in MS, in ALS, or the so-called Guillain-Barré syndrome. So what is the biological purpose of the paralysis? What is the significance of it? Well, in biological terms, the paralysis, the inability to move, is related or is equivalent to a fake death reflex. Because in nature, a predator usually only attacks a prey when it tries to escape. So the response is, since I can't escape, I play dead. The human brain is encoded with the same survival program. So let's look a little bit closer with this example. On this brain scan, we see the impact on the right side of the motor cortex, precisely in the area that controls the left arm, because there is a crossover correlation from the brain to the organ, in this case from the brain to the muscles. This indicates that the person had suffered or experienced a motor conflict that involves the left arm. For example, not being able to push somebody away, not being able to defend oneself, feeling stuck with the left arm. Well, in this example here on this picture, we see how a distressing vaccination experience can trigger such a conflict. Okay, we see how distressed this girl is, and how she's held very tightly, so the picture really speaks for itself. Depending now on the intensity of the conflict, the symptoms can range from weakness of the left arm to a complete paralysis. And the symptoms will last until the mind has received the all-clear signal, so to speak. And this is the starting point of German New Medicine. While the view that diseases are caused by negative beliefs is nowadays very popular. Beliefs can make you sick. Negative thoughts create diseases. Diseases are diseases of the mind are the standard phrases. But the work of researchers like Bruce Lipton or Dr. Joe Dispenza in the field of biology or neuroscience are of great value in many respects. However, concerning diseases, their explanations are still locked in the old medical paradigm and in the concept that diseases are failures or dysfunctions. Dysfunctions on the molecular level, as Bruce Lipton says. But Dr. Hammer's research over the last 30 years clearly shows and demonstrates that the beliefs cause disease theory is invalid. And here is why. We humans share this biological conflict with all species. Like all living beings, we also suffer loss conflicts, separation conflicts, abandonment conflicts, death fright conflicts, existence conflicts, starvation conflicts, nest worry conflicts, territorial conflicts, sexual conflicts, attack conflicts, feeling stuck conflicts. Conflicts that threaten our survival, the safety of our domain, the bond with members of our group, or the group itself. While it is the psyche that registers instantly or instinctively such dangers. Of course, such a conflict is how we individually perceive such a conflict is highly subjective. It is determined by our social and cultural conditioning, by our knowledge, by our expectations, by our vulnerabilities, by our values and our beliefs. However, and this is the point, it is our biological assessment of the situation. It is our biological reading of the conflict that determines which biological program will be switched on. This association with a very specific biological conflict theme takes place in a split of a second, occurs entirely on a subconscious level, and involves the whole organism. So the psyche, the brain, and the correlating organ. So let's go through this with an example. Let's say a woman receives the shocking news that a husband was involved or had a car accident and that he did not survive. At this moment, she can suffer a loss conflict which involves her ovaries. She can suffer a separation conflict which involves the lining of her milk ducts in her right breast if she is right-handed. You see the details we have based on Dr. Hammer's work. Beliefs cannot explain that. A belief that I think I might get cancer cannot determine if my breast cancer develops on the right or left breast. This woman can also suffer, based on her shock, an existence conflict, which involves her kidneys, an existence conflict of how can I get by if he leaves, how am I going to continue? She can also have a starvation conflict in a sense of not knowing how to provide for herself, how to put food on the table, which will involve her liver. She can also suffer a nest worry conflict, being concerned about her children if there is no dad around. In this case, it would involve the breast glands of her left breast, which is for a right-handed woman the mother-child breast, because it is on the left side where a right-handed woman holds her baby, so her psyche associated with the left side, her child. Or she can suffer also a feeling stuck conflict. What am I going to do now? She can also suffer the feeling stuck conflict when she receives the shock of feeling like rooted in the ground. So it will involve the muscles of her legs. She might then experience weakness in her legs, or even more than that. So we see how important it is to know Dr. Hammer's work, so when we have such a shock and we have consequently symptoms, that we know exactly why these symptoms occur at this moment. So now, as soon as the biological association is established, the conflict-related biological program will be set into motion. And this takes us to the second biological law, which says every biological special program has two phases, provided there is a resolution to the conflict. So for those of you who are new here today, let's just review a few terms. Normotonia, sympathikotonia, vagotonia, these are terms that relate to our autonomic nervous system. All it really says is that during the day we are in a natural state of stress or in sympathikotonia. During the night we are in a natural state of rest or in vagotonia. DHS stands for Dirk-Hammer syndrome. Dr. Hammer termed a biological conflict a Dirk-Hammer syndrome in honor of his son Dirk, whose unexpected tragic death was the reason why Dr. Hammer himself developed cancer and, which we know, initiated his research. And the moment we have such a DHS, the moment we have such an unexpected conflict shock, the normal day and night rhythm is instantly interrupted and we enter the conflict-related biological program. So let's look what happens. The moment we have this DHS, the moment the program starts, so during the conflict active phase, the entire organism is now engaged in facilitating a conflict resolution. So beginning with the DHS, the autonomic nervous system switches instantly into a prolonged state of sympathikotonia, causing sleeping difficulties. So typically, we wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and start thinking about the conflict. But there is a good reason for that, because the extra waking hours and the total focus on the conflict allow us to find a resolution to the conflict as quickly as possible. And this is highly important, because the shorter the conflict active phase, the shorter will be the healing phase. We also call the conflict active phase the cold phase, because when we are stressed, our blood vessels are constricted, and as a result we have cold hands. So we have cold hands during the entire conflict active phase. So from now on, you can start observing that. In other words, if you have cold hands for a longer period of time, or when you have such a conflict shock, your hands will immediately turn cold or become cold, which indicates now for you, I am in a biological program, which also means I should try to resolve this conflict as soon as possible in order to resolve it so the healing phase will be shorter. If we are not able to resolve a conflict right away because we are constrained, we want to try to downgrade the conflict, to minimize the conflict mass, which will also minimize the symptom that also occurred during the active phase. So let's look at the organ level. And I will explain this to you with the biological compass of German New Medicine. Here we see again on this diagram the conflict active phase and the healing phase. And we continue first with the conflict active phase. If more tissue is required, remember what I said, during the conflict active phase, the entire organism is mobilized in order to facilitate a conflict resolution. Okay? So if more tissue is required to facilitate a conflict resolution, the conflict-related organ responds to the conflict with cell augmentation or cell proliferation. So here we find during the conflict active phase tumors, for example, in the colon, in the lungs, in the liver, in the pancreas, in the breast glands, in the prostate, in the uterus, but also an overactive thyroid or enlarged tonsils. And all these conditions are linked to very specific biological conflicts that Dr. Hammer has identified. While the reverse principle applies to all organs and tissues that are controlled from the cerebrum. Okay, so I've reviewed this. All old brain controlled tissue generate during the conflict active phase cell augmentation. Old brain is the brainstem and the cerebellum, so the oldest part of the brain. The opposite principle applies to all organs and tissues that are controlled from the new brain or the so-called cerebrum. So if less tissue is required in order to facilitate a conflict resolution, the conflict-related organ responds with tissue loss, as we see, for example, in osteoporosis, in necrosis of the ovaries or the testicles. And again, all these conditions are linked to very specific conflict Dr. Hammer has identified. But we also have a third category, because certain cerebrum-controlled tissues, for example, the muscles, as already mentioned, but also the tissue of the inner ear, but also the so-called islet cells of the pancreas, they respond to the related conflict not with cell augmentation, so with tissue proliferation, cell proliferation, or tissue loss, but with functional loss or functional impairment, as we have already seen with the example of muscle paralysis. Here we also find hearing loss. Here we find also diabetes. Dr. Hammer's research is closely tied into the science of embryology. Taking into account the development of the human organism, Dr. Hammer discovered that the correlation between the psyche, the brain, and the organ is also closely connected to the three embryonic germ layers, to the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. And it is the brain CT studies that tied everything together. By comparing the location of the brain relays from where the biological programs are coordinated, Dr. Hammer discovered that, comparing that location with the development of the fetus, Dr. Hammer discovered that all organs that derive or develop from the same germ layer are also controlled from the same area of the brain. So, for example, all organs that develop from the endoderm are controlled from the brainstem. All organs that develop from the ectoderm are controlled from the cortex. And because of the innate connection with the psyche, every organ cell practically knows how to respond in order to facilitate a conflict resolution. For example, if a female suffers a nest worry conflict over the well-being of her child, the mesodermal breast gland cells controlled from the cerebellum instantly start to proliferate. The biological purpose of the cell proliferation is to provide more milk to the child in order to increase its chance of survival. And it is these additional breast gland cells that form a breast gland tumor. And even if a woman is not breastfeeding, this biological program is still activated because in biological terms, the female breast is synonymous for caring and for nurturing. So every female, whether mammal or human, is born with this biological response. It is a biological response that is encoded in the cells of her breast glands, in the brain cells that control the breast gland, and in the female psyche. And this is why breast cancer and all other cancers have existed since the beginning of life. And this, my friends, is why we don't have to be afraid of cancer, of any type of disease, especially when we see what happens during the healing phase. As soon as the conflict is resolved, the whole organism is now mobilized to restore the organ to its original function. First, the autonomic system instantly switches into a state of lasting vagotonia, forcing the organism to rest while healing runs its course. And now we're seeing action. All additional cells that were generated during the conflict active phase are now broken down and removed. A cell loss that occurred during the conflict active phase is now restored, refilled, and replenished with new cells. And now we are seeing symptoms we are all familiar with. For example, fatigue, because the whole organism is now in a state of lasting vagotonia, so we are very tired. Fever and inflammation, because of the increased blood flow to the healing tissue. Swelling. Healing always occurs in a fluid environment, so where there will be swelling, swelling causes pain. Then there is discharge, because the remnants of this decomposing and reconstructing process are now going to be eliminated. They're going to be eliminated through the urine, through the stool, through the skin, through the sputum in the case of lung cancer, through the vagina in the case of uterus cancer. Okay? There will also be night sweats, but night sweats only occur when tubercular bacteria are involved, because healing also involves the participation of bacteria and of fungi, which takes us to the fourth biological law and the beneficial role of microbes. So Dr. Hammer found and confirms that fungi and mycobacteria, which are the oldest microbes that populated the oldest tissue that is controlled from the oldest part of the brain, that these fungi and mycobacteria now remove and decompose the cells that are no longer required. So infections like candida infection or any bacterial infection only occurs during the healing phase. Tubercular bacteria and fungi also remove cancers. They remove lung tumors, liver tumors, breast gland tumors, pancreas tumors, liver tumors, prostate tumors, and so forth. All tumors that are controlled from the old brain. If a person doesn't carry the necessary microbes, let's say because of an overuse of antibiotics, the tumor stays in place and encapsulates. Healing also includes or involves the white blood cells and the so-called antibodies. It is one of the most intriguing insights we get from Dr. Hammer's work that the immune system, envisioned as a defense system against microbes, cancer cells, and toxins, is in reality a support system to aid a fast recovery. So if we only have to replace the word immune system with the term support system, and we are right in the heart of the new medical paradigm. We are right in the heart of the new medical paradigm, and the belief or the thought that there is a war in our body, or that there is a self-attack as proposed in the autoimmune system theory, that such a belief is outdated. And that the idea of fighting diseases and of beating a cancer is no longer necessary. It is meaningless, particularly when we understand that most healing symptoms, including cancers, many cancers in fact, are already healing symptoms. So if we take a look at these symptoms, we also recognize that many of them also occur when any wound is in healing. Okay, look at that. Here's a wound on a knee. What do we see? We see inflammation. We see swelling. We see definitely the man in pain. We see discharge, oozing, pus. Right? Well, my friends, the healing of cancer is exactly the same. There is no difference. So we might want to ask, why does healing, if these are all healing symptoms of so-called diseases, why does healing often take so long? Why do diseases become chronic? Well, the answer is because we keep scratching that wound in our psyche. Or we allow others to reopen a wound that is trying to heal. And we also have to be aware that most pharmaceutical drugs interrupt the healing phase. And the most brutal kind of interruption is chemo treatment. So this takes us back to the beginning, and we can close the circle and can compare the old medicine with the new medicine. So the old medicine claims that diseases are caused by pathogenic microbes. Based on the fourth biological law, microbes are not pathogenic. They are not disease-causing. On the contrary, microbes like bacteria or fungi participate in the healing process. Malignant cancer cells. Based on the third biological law, cancer cells are never malignant. Either they serve a biological purpose, which is during the conflict active phase, or they participate or are part of a refilling and replenishing process. Defective genes. Well, I take the liberty to refer to an article that I posted a few weeks ago on our website entitled Understanding Genetic Diseases in the Context of German New Medicine, where I go into that theory in great details. Weak immune system, well, we know there is no such a thing as an immune system. There's only a support system that assists the healing process. Well, in light of the new understanding of diseases, risk factors or the risk factor theory also has to be re-evaluated. A poor diet, toxins in our food, in our environment, smoking, geopathic radiation, electromagnetic pollutants do not cause diseases. However, these factors deplete our body of energy, energy needed particularly when we are in healing. Anything that drains the body's vitality makes the recovery phase much more difficult. A healthy diet, on the other hand, staying away from smoking, clearing the geopathic stress zones, and preventing the exposure to pollutants, toxins, and so forth, definitely accelerates the healing process. It can accelerate the recovery process immensely. And also, if we are in good shape, so to speak, we are less susceptible to have a conflict shock. This is prevention, one of many aspects. And this is also why we have to take care of ourselves. Feeling abandoned, isolated, left out, or left behind is one of the most difficult emotional experiences. We are by nature social beings, so we are all born with the desire to bond and to be with others, to be with our mother, our parents, our friends, our mate. And Dr. Hammer found that an abandonment is linked to our kidneys. To be more precise, to the kidney collecting tubules. In order to understand this better, we're going to look at the different tissues of the kidney and also the function of the kidney. The kidney collecting tubules are the oldest tissue. You see, in German New Medicine we work with color, so it's yellow, it's the oldest tissue. So the kidney collecting tubules are the oldest tissue of the kidney. They therefore develop first during the embryonic stage and derive from the endoderm, which is the oldest germ layer. And like all endodermal tissue, the kidney collecting tubules are controlled from the brainstem. The kidney parenchyma, here in orange, right? So the kidney parenchyma is basically the bulk of the kidney, and the kidney parenchyma is controlled from the midbrain, which is located between the old brain and the cerebrum, and the tissue derives from the mesoderm. The kidney parenchyma consists of millions and millions of nephrons that filter blood and produce urine. And the kidney collecting tubules, that's why they have the name, they collect the urine, and the urine flows through the renal pelvis to the ureter, the bladder, the urethra, and out it goes. And we want to keep in mind that urine consists of approximately 95% of water and 5% of urine substances, for example, or including creatinine. It is also worth mentioning that the salt content of our bodily fluids, notably of our blood and of the amniotic fluid, is the same as the isotonic salt concentration in seawater, namely 9 per mil. This is an indication that the human organism, and I emphasize organism, also originates in the ocean. The renal pelvis, or better, the lining of the renal pelvis is the youngest tissue of the kidney. It therefore derives from the youngest germ layer, which is the ectoderm, and is therefore controlled from the youngest part of the brain, which is the cerebral cortex. But today, we're going to concentrate on the kidney collecting tubules. The kidney collecting tubules provide us with one of the most significant survival programs that relate back to the time when our evolutionary ancestors were still living in the water, and being thrust on shore would be a life-threatening situation. If this is the case, the kidney collecting tubule would instantly start to proliferate. The biological purpose of the cell proliferation is to close the excretion filter in order to withhold water to prevent the organism from drying out. This water retention program is vital because without water, all metabolic processes of the body stop functioning. And Dr. Hammer discovered that our kidney collecting tubules respond the same way when we feel like a fish out of water, when we feel ousted, excluded, left behind, isolated, and alone. We therefore call the conflict linked to the kidney collecting tubules an abandonment conflict. We also call it an existence conflict. An existence conflict is experienced as a fear for one's life. A cancer diagnosis, for example, can trigger such an existence conflict. An existence conflict can also be experienced when our livelihood is at stake. The feeling behind the conflict is, I have lost everything. This could be the loss of a home, it could be the loss of a loved one, of a parent, of a child, of a partner who provided safety and a home, physically and emotionally. And this, my friends, is what happens. The moment the abandonment or existence conflict occurs, the conflict impacts in the area of the brain that controls the kidney tubules, and the program is switched on. Starting with the conflict, there will be cell proliferation in the kidney collecting tubules, and the cell proliferation closes the excretion filter, causing water retention. But the body not only retains water, but also creatinine. Clinically, this creatinine retention is called uremia. Creatinine is a waste product of the protein metabolism and is usually excreted with the urine. But in the critical event of an existence conflict, the kidney recycles creatinine into protein in order to provide the body with nutrition. Why? Because for our evolutionary ancestors, the biological conflict of being swept out of the water environment meant, in addition to the danger of drying out, also a threat of starvation, particularly of dying from protein deficiency. And for this emergency situation, Mother Nature has created yet another biological program, which is to convert a toxin like creatinine into food in order to give the organism a chance to survive. Isn't that beautiful? The degree of the water retention, just think logically, the degree of the water retention is determined by the intensity of the conflict. So for somebody who knows German New Medicine, so if we know German New Medicine, even a small abandonment conflict will now be noticed. We have a hard time fitting into our shoes, our pants are tight, the fingers are swollen, the rings are tight, the socks show marks on the legs, and we urinate less. Because of the decreased urine output, the urine is concentrated and deep yellow. So this is a good way to observe a kidney collecting tubule activity, or the activity of such a program firsthand. Water retention also causes weight gain. 1 liter of water weighs approximately 2.5 pounds. So if we start gaining weight, or although we exercise regularly and haven't changed our diet, so if we start gaining weight and have a hard time losing weight, then an abandonment conflict is most likely in the picture. If with an ongoing intense abandonment conflict, a person can gain a considerable amount of weight, the water is basically stored in the fat cells. So independent of the calorie intake and even without overeating, a person can gain a lot of weight. The reabsorbed water basically inflates the fat cells. This has nothing to do with a wrong diet. Somebody who is born with less fat cells than average, this person will retain less water and as a result will gain less weight, but this is really the only difference. Dr. Hammer's work and research also explains the increasing number of overweight children. Children are very vulnerable, especially when they are little. Children suffer abandonment conflicts when they're put into daycare, when the parents don't have a lot of time for them, when a new sibling is born that gets more attention, when they feel unwanted, when they don't feel part of the pack at home, of the pack in kindergarten, of the pack in school. Abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse by a family member can cause severe abandonment conflicts. Children also suffer abandonment conflicts when a family member leaves. For example, if a grandparent dies, or if one of the parents moves out. We see a lot of this. So we look at this from a completely new perspective. What is interesting in German, or in the German language, the word the word for abandonment is sich Mutterseelen allein gelassen fühlen, which means to be left without your mother's soul. How true is that? Dr. Hammer's work also explains why kidney problems are so often, or we see kidney problems so often in pets. Our pets suffer terribly when they are neglected or when they are abandoned, and we also see it in their eyes. So if the abandonment or existent conflicts lasts over a long period of time and is very intense, then the cell proliferation in the tubules forms a kidney tumor. Well, whether the right or left kidney is involved is random. Also, what we have to realize is that every kidney has 3 sets of tubules. So the tumor grows or develops in one of the kidney and in one of the tubules. But in any case, there is no reason to panic. A tumor is never malignant. It always serves a biological purpose. We have to learn to understand this response on the organ level in the biological context and the programs that we have inherited. So let's see what happens during the healing phase. Well, as soon as the conflict is resolved, the proliferation in the tubules instantly stops. And now tubercular bacteria and fungi start to remove the tumor. Okay? According to the fourth biological law, fungi and bacteria are the oldest microbes that populated the oldest tissue, and they start to remove the now superfluous cells as soon as the conflict is resolved. When tubercular bacteria are involved, then we see during the healing phase kidney tuberculosis. While in our part of the world, people are not supposed to have tuberculosis. So the condition was renamed. It is now called nephrotic syndrome. In the third world, however, it is still called tuberculosis, or maybe AIDS. When fungi are involved, like candida fungi, then we see during the healing phase so-called renal candidiasis, basically a fungal kidney infection. But based on the fourth biological law, it is not the fungi, it is not the DB bacteria that cause the infection. On the contrary, the DP bacteria and the fungi, they help to heal the cancer. So it is only the symptoms like inflammation, fever, a cloudy urine, or night sweats that are interpreted as an infection. There's also another important thing we have to keep in mind in the healing of the kidney, which is protein loss. Because tubercular secretion is rich in protein, which is now excreted through the urine, causing protein deficiency. Severe protein deficiency can cause serious complications. In fact, it can cause death. So eating food rich in proteins is essential during the healing phase. If a person has a hard time eating, then protein drinks are a great option, but also supplementation with amino acids, which are building blocks of proteins, are also of great help. Another thing we should keep in mind that we should not should consume protein before 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Because after 3 p.m., the body has a difficult time with breaking down proteins. Proteins should also not be mixed with carbohydrates, because mixed with carbohydrates, the protein metabolism slows down. So we understand now that the healing phase is definitely the wrong time for raw food diets, for juice diets, or for fasting, which is often recommended if somebody has cancer. And this, my friends, applies to all tumors that are decomposed during the healing phase, which are tumors and cancers that are controlled from the old brain. So not only to kidney cancer, but also to liver cancer, pancreas cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, and so forth. Okay? So we really should watch our diet. The trick is, as soon as a person has night sweats, we know tubercular bacteria are involved, and this is when we need the proteins. We often see cancer patients of people that have cancer wither away, although they are not on chemo, excuse me, because they don't get enough proteins. Okay, so proteins, proteins, proteins. Well, if a person doesn't have the microbes, doesn't carry the microbes, again, often because of an overuse of antibiotics, then the kidney tumor stays in place and encapsulates. Well, this would mean, in theory, that the water retention stays forever. But this is not the case, because detoxifying the organism, which is one of the main functions of the kidney, is way too important. So as soon as the conflict is resolved, okay, the body uses the other kidney or the other tubules to release the water. And this is when when people resolve abandonment or the existent conflict, at the moment of the resolution, people start peeing, and it could be quite a lot. So you can start observing this from now on. That all of a sudden you have times a day where just a lot of being, you gained weight before. Now you know that this is connected with feeling abandoned, having an existence conflict. There is a bill in the mailbox, you say, oh my God, how am I going to handle this one? We feel ignored, not understood. And all of a sudden, we, as I said, we gain a little bit of weight. And when it's resolved, it's going to be released. Yeah, this is a diagram, a German New Medicine diagram, that shows the organs that are controlled from the brainstem. I'll just give you a little bit of an idea here. We see right in the center of the brainstem, right in the heart of the brainstem, of the oldest part of the brain, is the control center of the prostate and of the uterus, which are the organs that secure procreation. We also see here the control centers of the organs of the alimentary canal from the mouth to the rectum, beautifully arranged in a ring form order, starting on the right with the pharynx, so the mouth area, esophagus, stomach, liver, pancreas, small intestine, large intestine, rectum. So beautifully arranged in a ring shape. And here on top here, we have the control center of the kidney collecting tubules. The right kidney collecting tubules on the right side, the left on the left. Because there is no crossover correlation from the brain to the organ. So if a person has a kidney cancer in the left kidney, it shows on the brain scan on the right side. If the kidney tumor is on the left, it shows on the left. And here is an example. Okay? This brain can shows, we see this beautifully, we see the white glia pockets. This is phase B of the healing of a kidney cancer. On a brain scan, this shows as white glia pockets. Conventional medicine would diagnose this as a brain tumor. Okay? I explained the nature of brain tumors already in a previous lecture. It is also now, as you probably know, on the website, the recording of that, so you can go there and watch it. But here we see beautifully, we see on a scan what is happening. So good news, the kidney tumor is in the last part of healing. The abandonment and existence conflict has been resolved. The person has no longer the difficult phase, which is the swelling and so forth. Okay. Another part. In German New Medicine, we call the conflict that is linked to the kidney tubules also a refugee conflict. People of an entire region can suffer such a refugee conflict. For example, if in regions where there is war or if there is a natural disaster. These are the real refugees. Just think like a fish out of water. These are people that have to be on the move, away from home. So when we hear reports that there are tuberculosis outbreaks in refugee camps, now we understand. Because it is in the camps where people find a shelter, which is basically the resolution of the conflict. This also explains why tuberculosis, not nephrotic syndrome, why tuberculosis is so dominant in the third world. Existence conflicts, a fish out of water, on the move, abandonment, refugees. Those are the small refugees, literally. Children can suffer a refugee conflict after their parents separated and they have to shuttle back and forth between mom's place and dad's place. Children suffer refugee conflicts when they have to change school or when they have to move and have to leave their friends behind. We can also suffer a refugee conflict in our own home. And I want to share with you a case or an example of German new medicine in practice. This is about a man who suffered a refugee conflict every time relatives were visiting, because he had to move out of his office and his office basically turned into the guest room. So when the friends or the relatives were visiting, he had water retention, and after they have left, he had night sweats. So he couldn't figure out what the pattern was, what was going on. But with learning German new medicine, he immediately was able to make the connections. So what was the resolution? The resolution was in this case, finding an arrangement, finding a compromise that suited everybody who was involved. And this stopped the symptoms. With German new medicine, as we see just with this small example, we are really in control. Because we know now why we have a symptom, why we have the symptom now, to what type of conflict the symptoms is connected. If the symptom is a conflict active symptoms, or if it is already a healing symptoms. Okay? And we know the biological significance of it. And we know that we don't have to panic, and we don't have to be scared. I'd like just to show you, share with you, here basically as a slide, the scientific chart of German new medicine. Okay, you can go on our website, learninggnm.com, and there's a lot of explanation. Also, you can order it from there. So basically the scientific chart, this is the wall chart, quite large, shows all organs according to the 3 embryonic germ layers. Okay, the endoderm yellow, the mesoderm orange, and the ectoderm here in red. It also shows the organs. It shows the symptoms that occur in the conflict active phase. It shows the symptoms that occur in the healing phase. It also indicates the biological significance of it and what things we have to watch out and so forth. The scientific chart is also in book form. There's also diagrams with it. I just thought I'd let you know, because this is what people actually use when they learn the work. Because we have hemorrhoids, or we have a skin rash, or we have a sore back, or we have a sore ear. We look it up on the chart and say, aha, this is linked, oh, this is why this, and this has happened, and we are in control of making changes and act like a GNM person. So we have learned that the kidney tubules are linked to an abandonment, to feeling abandoned. Well, abandonment can also be experienced as rejection, particularly as sexual rejection. If a conflict has a sexual content, then other biological programs run their course. In women, it's the cervix. In men, it's the prostate. And we're going to start with the ladies. See, now we can already talk German medicine. Hey, this is why we went through the germ layers, so we can appreciate the scientific value of the work. Let's first look at the organ. The cervix is the passageway to the uterus. The lining of the cervix derives from the ectoderm, okay, the youngest germ layer, and is therefore controlled from the youngest part of the brain, which is the cerebral cortex. To be precise, the lining of the cervix is controlled from the left temporal lobe, just above the left ear. The conflict linked to the cervix is a sexual conflict of not being able to mate. In nature, such a conflict occurs if mating is unexpectedly interrupted or doesn't take place for one or the other reason. If this is the case, the cervix instantly starts to ulcerate, causing tissue loss. The biological purpose of the tissue loss is to widen the cervix, so when mating finally takes place, more sperm can reach the uterus to enhance the chance of conception. For us women, this conflict translates, this sexual mating conflict, into sexual rejection, sexual frustration, feeling sexually turned down or unwanted. A woman can suffer such a conflict if she finds out that her husband is interested in other females, that he's sexually attracted to another woman. Just the suspicion that he might sleep with another woman can already trigger the conflict. In general, a sexual conflict for a female in this case can be related to any distress in relation to sexuality. This includes unwanted sex. This includes unwanted sexual practices, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, rape, any shocks in relation with pornography, for example. So young or girls can experience such a conflict at a very young age. So let's see what happens. The moment the conflict occurs, the conflict impacts in the area of the brain that controls the cervix, and this moment the cells in the cervix start to ulcerate, or the lining starts to ulcerate, causing tissue loss. During the conflict active phase, there are no symptoms, so the woman is not going to notice anything. Okay, she's conflict active. Keep in mind, she's preoccupied with the conflict. What's going on here? In this case, as far as the sexual conflict is concerned, she can't sleep. She has cold hands. She is in a state of stress. Physically, she doesn't notice anything. This changes the moment the conflict is resolved. The moment the conflict is resolved, the ulcerated area in the cervix will be refilled and replenished with new cells through cell proliferation. And it is this cell proliferation that is diagnosed as a cervical cancer. An absolutely natural biological process. No reason to panic. On the contrary, in German New Medicine we call all tumors that develop during the healing phase curative tumors, because it is an indication that the related conflict has been resolved, that the tissue is now in healing, and that the so-called cancer is of a healing nature. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, we have basically two groups of cancers. One group that develops during the conflict active phase, which are all tumors that are controlled from the old brain, and all these tumors serve a biological purpose. They have a biological significance in order to facilitate a conflict resolution on the organ level, as we have seen today with kidney cancer. Okay? And then there's another type or set of tumors that only occurs during the healing phase. In this case, it is a refilling and replenishing process. The tumor does not serve a biological purpose. It is part of the healing process of refilling the ulceration and the tissue loss that occurred during the conflict active phase. So curative and healing nature. Okay. We also see the difference. A person who has a tumor that is in the active phase is also stressed out, can't sleep, has the cold hands, while a tumor woman or a man who is in healing with a healing tumor The person is very tired, fatigued, okay, can't get out of bed, and the pain included with healing, swelling, inflammation, infection. There are hardly any symptoms during the conflict active phase, because during the conflict active phase, as I like to say, we don't have time to be sick, quote unquote. We gotta resolve the conflict, eh? Do something about what took place. And the nervous system and the entire body is engaged in helping us to resolve this. And when the conflict is resolved, we go into healing, and now it's time to rest. Now it's time to heal. This is why we are tired during the healing phase, so we can support this on the organ level. And this is when the symptoms start. But now we know, and that's the good news, the vast majority of symptoms that we actually notice are already healing symptoms. So we go back to the cervix. So this refilling and replenishing process in the cervix lining occurs during phase A of healing. This is basically the most, let's say, potentially uncomfortable phase, because healing always occurs in a fluid environment, so where there will be swelling at the site, which can cause pain. Can also be bleeding at this time. Think of it as a construction site. Lots of action there. So these small capillaries, they break easily. So during that phase, there can also be a little bit of bleeding. Of course, there's discharge, because the remnants are going to be eliminated of that, of this reconstructing process. Well, then there is the so-called epileptoid crisis. This is basically the healing crisis. Basically, what happens during the healing crisis is that the body is all of a sudden, the entire organism is put back into a conflict active state just for the time being. And the biological purpose of this stress push, of this reacting activation of the conflict, is to press the edema out. The edema that is part of this phase A of healing. An edema is basically a water pocket that protects the area while it's healing. And at the height of the healing phase, this edema has reached its maximum size, and poof, there is this stress push pressing the edema out. This is when we have the crisis. Also, a person urinate quite a bit at this time. But now, because of the edema having been pressed out, the swelling is down. And the person, the woman in this case, goes into the healing phase B, and this is when basically everything just goes back to normal, provided there is no conflict relapse. So let's talk about this for a little while. Because every conflict relapse, so the woman is in healing, and then there is a relapse, there is a trigger, where she has again the conflict activity about the sexual conflict. Okay? So there is a relapse of the conflict. And as we understand, every relapse, relapse is a good word, interrupts the healing phase and therefore prolongs the healing phase. So in German New Medicine, we pay particular attention to these triggers so that healing can finally be complete. So let's talk about Pap tests. Well, a Pap test can be positive both in the active phase or in the healing phase. All the Pap test indicates is that there are changes in the lining of the cervix, in the tissue of the cervix. With GNM, we can stay completely calm because we know that these changes take place either in the conflict active phase, because there's a tissue loss in the lining of the cervix, or in the healing phase when there is the replenishing process. So in any case, there is never a reason to panic. It's just a marker. Well, it's always good to be reminded that these biological conflicts are unexpected, was not ready for this, and very subjective. Remember what we learned with the introduction. It depends what our mind associates with that conflict situation. It depends on the biological assessment of the situation. Okay? So it is unexpected and subjective. So this is why not every woman who has a sexual conflict of one or the other way gets a cervical cancer. But if she has a cervical cancer, usually if she is diagnosed with the cancer, it's already in healing. It's already an indication that the sexual conflict has already been resolved, that there is a curative trauma that is in action there. Okay, and now we have to, in the therapeutic approach, now we have to start to look for the triggers. We know now it is a sexual conflict, okay? So we're going to look, since when were you diagnosed? Well, 2-3 months ago. So we know, when did you start to have symptoms? Well, 3-4 months ago, this is when the woman went into healing. This is when the conflict was resolved. So she knows 100%, if we point the finger that this is a sexual conflict of rejection or a distress with sexuality, she knows exactly what we're talking about. Okay? So now we have to evaluate, is this still a natural time, so to speak, frame where healing takes place? Remember the sore knee, the man that had the accident? That takes a little while to heal, right? And as Voltaire, the French philosopher, so beautifully said, the secret of medicine is to distract the patient while nature heals itself. Right? And this is the same thing. So that knee needs time to heal. The cervix needs time to heal. So we have to look how long has this healing process been going on, so we can sort of evaluate, is still that the normal healing process in the time frame? Then distract yourself. She will know if the sexual conflict is completely resolved, and just enjoy life. However, if that cervical cancer is still there months and months later, now we're going to look for the triggers. What is still upsetting you? Where is the place and the woman, the other woman, and this and that still reminds you of that conflict? And this is where we have to start working on, try to neutralize, as I like to call it, these triggers so healing can be complete. My friends, there's lots of work involved. But now we have a key, because all these symptoms are no longer a mystery. We know what causes it, we know in what phase we are, and most of all, we don't have to be scared. Okay, this is beautiful. This is a brain scan that shows, again, I have another one coming up here, the phase B of a cervical cancer in healing. So if we look at the brain scan, we know that person is in the last phase here of healing of a cervical cancer. Okay? In previous CT scans, if she's active, she would see the target ring configuration in that area. Okay? But this is already the glia pocket, diagnosed by conventional medicine as a brain tumor. See what brain tumors are, okay? Every time there is healing during phase B, there are the glia pockets in the area of the brain that control the healing of the organ. If this is a tumor, if this is a skin rash, if this is a common cold, if this is a sore back, in that phase we see the glia pocket. Okay. But conventional medicine, they look either at the brain, they look at the body, they look at the psyche, but they don't see the whole picture. And most of all, it's the old medicine that thinks and believes that diseases are errors of nature, and they are not. Yeah, here compare again. Here's the kidney cancer in phase B in healing. Now we see the glia pockets. Okay, here we go. Well, medical science claims that cervical cancer is caused by strains of the so-called human papillomavirus. allegedly transmitted through sexual contact. In 2006, the FDA approved a vaccine against cervical cancer vaccine that presumably prevents cervical cancer. And shortly after, governments around the world mandated that girls should be offered the vaccine to prevent cancer. It should be offered to them before they become sexually active. This is how girls, young girls, between the age of 11 and 15, actually 9 and 15, became the target group of the vaccination industry. In spite of a CDC report that cervical cancer vaccines are linked to death, the FDA committee recommends boys and men to get the HPV vaccine. Well, men can obviously not get cervical cancer. But so the argument goes, if or when a boy or man performs oral sex on a female, he could contract the virus and thus be at risk of developing throat cancer. God help us. But it doesn't stop there. The HPV vaccine may also prevent breast cancer, so they claim. Vaccination nations. This takes us back to the presentation I gave last November about the truth about infectious diseases, but also I talked about the problem conventional medical science has, because the big question is, again, where is the scientific evidence of the HPV virus? The answer is, there is none. Or, in the words of Canadian biologist David Crowe, a closer look reveals that actually there is no proof. This quote was taken from the book Virus Mania by Thorsten Engelbrecht and Klaus Köhnlein. I introduced the book last time at the lecture here in Vancouver. And the authors of Virus Mania also demonstrate the following. As with HIV, hepatitis, SARS, polio, H5N1, H1N1, HPV has never been scientifically proven. Isolating one of these viruses in a purified form with its complete genetic material and virus shell directly from it and then imaging it with an electron microscope has never taken place. Mike Adams, editor of Natural News, wrote on October 8, 2009, so just a few months ago, the mere presence of a specific microorganism in a specific organ or specimen does not mean to say it is the cause of the cancer. In most viral studies, the antibiotics are demonstrated, but not the virus itself. Again, let us not fall for this type of science. I fully agree, and that's why we go back to German medicine. And the prostate. We look first at the organ. The prostate is a gland that produces seminal fluid. It is the male organ that secures procreation. And this is why the prostate derives from the oldest germ layer, which is the endoderm, and is controlled from the oldest part of the brain, which is the brainstem. A protein that is a component of seminal fluid is commonly referred to as PSA, or prostate-specific antigen. Well, the conflict linked to the prostate is according to its function a procreation conflict. So in nature, such a conflict occurs if a male is not being able to mate. Remember, when a female is not able to mate, the cervix lining ulcerates, causing tissue loss. So when mating takes place, more sperm can reach the uterus to enhance the chance of conception. So if a male cannot mate, the prostate tissue, the prostate cells start to proliferate. And the biological purpose of the cell proliferation is to produce more seminal fluid. So when mating occurs, there is a higher chance of impregnating the female. In the human world, a man can suffer a procreation conflict if he's not able to have children, if he cannot have children. Or, so Dr. Hammer found, also when his children cannot produce any offspring. So this correlation, this innate correlation between the prostate and the procreation conflict shows that a man's concern about not having children or grandchildren is also a biological concern. Like with females, a male can suffer a sexual mating conflict experienced as sexual rejection, sexual frustration, being sexually turned down or unwanted. So such a conflict can experienced by a man when his wife or his girlfriend leaves him, particularly when she leaves him for another man. Or the suspicion that she is sexually attracted to another man can already trigger the conflict. But this is now very interesting. Dr. Hammer found that the prostate is also linked to what we call a gender conflict. A gender conflict has nothing to do, or is nothing to do with a man's sexuality. A gender conflict is about maleness itself. It's about being disregarded as a man, disregarded as a husband, as the father of the children, as the provider of the family. So ugly divorces, custody battles, emotional and financial abuse can trigger that conflict. So what happens? The moment the conflict occurs, the conflict impacts in the area of the brain that controls the prostate, and the program is switched on. And at this point, the prostate cells start to proliferate. And parallel to the cell proliferation, the PSA level naturally rises. Conventional medicine uses PSA as a tumor marker. But with German New Medicine we know there's nothing abnormal with an elevated PSA level. All it indicates is that the man is conflict active with a prostate-related conflict. So an absolutely normal event. Nothing is abnormal with an elevated PSA level. If the conflict lasts over a longer period of time, then the cell proliferation forms a prostate tumor or prostate cancer. While during the conflict active phase, there's usually no symptom. So most prostate cancers are in fact found during routine checkups. So it is the increasing pressure of testing or for testing why prostate cancer is the most dominant or frequent cancer in males. In fact, this increasing pressure for testing for men and for women is the reason why cancer, the numbers of cancer, increased so drastically over the last few decades. So not much to notice here. The PSA level is up, so when a man goes for checking or screening, okay, he has a high PSA level, then it says we gotta keep an eye on it and so forth. Okay, now we know why it's up, and the man knows he's active with such a conflict. As soon as the conflict is resolved, healing sets in. Now we are seeing symptoms. Well, if the tubercular bacteria or fungi are available, the microbes will now start to decompose the tumor. That produces tubercular secretion, which is eliminated through the urine, and this is why the urine is cloudy. There might also be blood in the urine, because as I explained, these small capillaries, they break easily. So there is discharge in the urine, there is blood in the urine, there is always swelling, because healing always occurs in a fluid environment, so there will be swelling there. With a large tumor that has to be decomposed, there's even, of course, more swelling during phase A. Such a tumor can compress the urethra, resulting in a delayed urine flow. Dr. Hammer recommends in acute cases a catheter, temporary catheter, until the healing is complete. During the healing phase, there are also night sweats. This is when tubercular bacteria in the picture. See, and this is when a man starts to see a doctor if he doesn't go for checkups. He's tired, he has discharge and blood in the urine, the swelling and the pain, and this is then when the diagnosis sets in. We know this is in healing. With the night sweats and all these symptoms, okay, always, gentlemen, watch the protein loss. So it is very important to supplement the protein loss during the healing phase. If the man doesn't have the TB bacteria, the tumor stays in place, okay? But the PSA level goes back to normal, because the tumor doesn't serve a biological function. No need. The conflict is resolved, so the tumor stays and encapsulates. Prostatitis, it's an inflammation of the prostate, inflammation, healing phase, hot phase, warm phase, typically for healing. So it's an inflammation. It's all a question how it's diagnosed. Okay? Together with healing, the PSA level goes back to normal, provided, okay, you know what this line means, provided there is no conflict relapse. So with the conflict relapse, we see again conflict active with the sexual rejection and the conflict that I mentioned, the PSA level goes parallel, up and down, okay? But in any case, the PSA level is no reason to panic whatsoever. So what about benign prostate hyperplasia? It's all just names. Okay, in German New Medicine, the differentiation between benign and malignant is pointless, because there is no such thing as malignancy. It's all serves a purpose. Nature doesn't make mistakes. So what is the benign prostate hyperplasia? Well, we have to realize or know that conventional medicine differentiates between two types of PSA. To make this simple, or put this simple, there is the bound PSA and the free PSA. And when there is an elevated bound PSA level, this is considered in conventional medical terms to be a prostate cancer, or indicates a prostate cancer. If the free PSA is up, then it's either prostatitis or it is benign prostate hyperplasia. Just labels, nothing to worry about. Okay? So, but how reliable is PSA testing? Well, according to the BBC News, not very much. PSA test of little value. This is from a website of BBC News, February 6, 2006. Let's read this together. A screening test which can reveal prostate cancer is too unreliable to be recommended to patients, it is claimed. A UK expert writing in the British Medical Journal, a renowned journal, says it should not be widely used as it is not clear whether it actually benefits patients. Professor Markolin from the Wolfson Institute of Preventive Medicine in London wrote in the British Medical Journal that public health authorities should not advocate tests of unproven value. He said, at present the only certainty about PSA testing is that it causes harm. Some men will receive treatment that is unnecessary, and the treatment will cause incontinence, impotence, and other complications. Well, look at that. According to an article in the British Medical Journal of 2003, PSA tests fail 92% of time. Well, it gets even more interesting than that. Because a man can have an elevated PSA level even if he doesn't have prostate cancer. He can also have an elevated PSA level even when his prostate has been removed. And on top of it, women can also have an elevated PSA level. As it is published in the New England Journal of Medicine, a very renowned medical journal, PSA levels in a woman with metastatic breast cancer. So how is this possible? It is possible because PSA is not only present in the prostate, it is also present in other tissues like the breast. It has also been found in the liver and in the salivary glands, for example. That means that there is nothing specific about the prostate-specific antigen. There it goes. So what is an antigen? Well, an antigen is by definition any substance that stimulates the immune system. Well, no immune system, no antigens. Life is good with GNM. We're not finished. Okay, now we're going to go serious again. There was a little bit of a breeze. Okay, we're going to start now. I'm going to explain to you the so-called kidney collecting tubule syndrome. According to Dr. Hammer, his most important discovery. And you will soon understand why. The kidney collecting tubule syndrome involves two biological programs. First, there is an active existence, abandonment, or refugee conflict with water retention. So there is the conflict active phase of an existence, abandonment, or refugee conflict with water retention. And at the same time, there is a healing phase, in other words, a healing of any organ. For example, the healing of a breast cancer, that's why I have the picture here. This is an intraductal breast cancer in healing. We see the inflammation and the swelling. Well, an existence conflict is often caused by the fear associated with the disease, by the fear of cancer, the fear of the treatment, the fear of the operation, the fear of having to go to the hospital. And this is why we call in German medicine the conflict linked to the kidney tubules also a hospitalization conflict. Because it is when people are hospitalized that the water retention often increases. Even more so when they are in intensive care. because the water retention increases proportionally to the conflict activity. Hospitalization itself can cause or can create situations that cause abandonment conflicts. Hey, when the doctor doesn't have time for the patient, when the patient doesn't feel cared for, if there are no visitors. So if we have a loved one ever in intensive care or in the hospital, stay with them as much as you can. Take shifts. Make sure there's always somebody there from the pack. That can save a life. Because water retention can cause serious complications if an organ is in healing at the time. Because water is exceedingly stored in the area that is in healing. Particularly during phase A, where there is already an edema and water pockets, so to speak, at the site. So let's see what this implies. This translates into the following, and we're going to just a few points what happens on the organ level. With water retention, every tumor that is in healing becomes larger because there's water stored in the healing tumor. This is often then diagnosed as a fast-growing tumor or as an aggressive tumor, leading to more aggressive treatment, more fear, more water retention, a vicious cycle. Because of the water retention and the swelling, the pain increases, leading to increased pain medication, such as morphine and morphine derivatives, another part of the puzzle, while people often don't survive. Cysts may burst. So if there's a cyst in the healing phase, which I explain in a different lecture, another lecture, such a cyst is filled with even more water and the cyst can burst, causing complications. Ducts may occlude. So if there is a healing in a duct, a tumor in a duct, let's say in the bile ducts of the liver, with water retention, this might occlude the bile ducts, causing serious complications potentially. The same applies to colon cancer. So if there's a colon tumor in healing and there's water retention, this colon tumor all of a sudden becomes large and can obstruct the intestines. With water retention, bronchitis turns into pneumonia, and so on. I just make a few points. Here we see a picture. This is a liver cancer with water retention. See how big that is. With water retention, water is also exceedingly stored in the brain edema that is always present in the brain, obviously, parallel to the healing on the corresponding organ. So with water retention, such a brain edema can become so large and can cause such brain pressure that the person falls into a coma and dies. The epicrisis, which is the stress push that pushes and presses the edema out, can become critical with water retention because the brain pressure is just too big. So epicrisis is that a person would normally survive, let's say a heart attack, for example, might be fatal if there is water retention. Brain tumors, you know now what we mean with that. Brain tumor, a so-called brain tumor, the glia pockets is the part 2 of phase B of healing, always at the site in the brain, parallel to the healing on the organ level. So such a brain tumor with water retention, again, can become larger because water is stored in between the glia cells. This takes us to the question of medication, particularly of cortisone. Cortisone is a steroid. It is a stimulant. It has strong sympathicotonic properties. What does that mean? If it has strong sympathicotonic properties, cortisone increases the water retention, which means it increases the swelling on the organ in the brain and so forth. So cortisone can worsen the situation dramatically. Now we're going to open an entirely new chapter of German medicine and Dr. Hammer's amazing work. And this is very exciting. Dr. Hammer found that the 5 biological laws not only apply to physical diseases, but also to mood disorders like depression, or mental disorders, or so-called bipolar disorders. In other words, he found that mood disorders and mental disorders are also linked to biological conflicts, which means they have a brain correlate, and they have an organ correlate. They have a conflict active phase, and they have a healing phase. And most of all, the 5th biological law also applies, which is every disease, quote unquote, is a biological special program of nature created to support an organism during unexpected distress. And I'm going to give you a taste of this amazing work. Dr. Hammer found that a mental disorder, or rather a mental imbalance, only occurs if the person is in a so-called schizophrenic constellation. The word schizophrenic implies that both brain hemispheres are involved. Or to be more precise, a person is in constellation, as we say in GNM. So a person is in constellation if the person is conflict active with 2 or more conflicts that involve the right and left side of the brain. And it is the combination or constellation, just in the zodiac, or constellation of conflicts that determine the changes on the mental level. So it is the combination and the constellation of the conflicts that determines if a person is hearing voices, is paranoid, has certain obsessive compulsions, is aggressive, or shows an autistic behavior and other so-called psychotic symptoms. And depending on the degree of the conflicts involved, this mental imbalance can range from mood disorders to a severe manic depressive state and a severe mental illness. So quickly, just in a few words, how does a person get out of this? Lots of work. But we concentrate and focus on the recent conflicts. Okay, there's lots more information I can't tie in right now. We focus on the latest and recent conflicts. But the point is, as soon as, watch the slide, as soon as one brain hemisphere is conflict-free, the person is no longer in constellation, and the behavior and the condition can go back to normal. As I said, lots of work involved both for the client and the GNM practitioner. But now, this is the first time that we have a key to open and unlock that door. And now I'm going to introduce you to two constellations. First, the kidney collecting tubule constellation. Here we have a brain scan. And you see here the 2 sharp ring configurations, a classic, beautiful tubal constellation. Here again, the one above, healing of a kidney cancer, clear pocket. Okay, this is active. So we have learned that the kidney tubules are linked to abandonment conflicts, existence conflict, refugee conflicts, hospitalization conflict. Just think fish out of water. So the first conflict impacts of these kind impacts randomly right or left. So the first conflict goes, in this case, to the left kidney, controlled from the left side. As soon as the second conflict impacts on the left side, so involving the right side, the right kidney, the person is in constellation. And this kidney collecting tubal constellation manifests itself as disorientation. So the person who has with a small kidney collecting tubal constellation has a poor sense of direction. These people get easily lost in unfamiliar places. In fact, or more precise, there is this fear of getting lost. There is this anxiety of getting lost. People in this constellation, they just love to stay at home or close to home. When they go out, they usually go to the same restaurant, they go to the same pub, they walk the same routes, they sit at the same bench. They just like to be in their surrounding. People in this constellation, they feel not comfortable with traveling, particularly not with traveling on their own. So when they have to travel for personal or professional reasons, they are at the airport hours before departure. And they also go straight to the gate. And they're not going to shop around and explore the stores. They stick close to the counter so they don't miss boarding or, God forbid, a gate change. But why this behavior? Why this compulsion? Well, we are back to the fish out of water. The compulsion to stay as close to home as possible relates back to the original conflict of being swept out of the water and thrust on shore. But by staying put, this is the chance to be picked up by the next wave and to be carried back home, so to speak. And we know this behavior from people who are lost in the desert. What do? They go in circles, right? They stay in the area because this is their only chance to be found and rescued. If that tubal constellation is more intense, a person can be so disoriented that the person no longer knows where he or she is. And this is what we find in psychiatric clinics. This is what we find in nursing homes, in hospitals, and this is what we find in people with Alzheimer's who wander around totally disoriented, feeling like a fish out of water in that home. With this constellation, there is also a sense of being figuratively lost. Confused. So confused people typically stare into space. They have this vacant look. They are incapable of any reflections. They are absent and apathetic. But there is also a loss of sense of time. To be more precise, there is a loss of sense of the present time. But this loss of the sense of the present time is substituted with delusions of being somewhere else or of living in an earlier period of one's life. And this is exactly the biological purpose. This is the purpose of the constellation, because the constellation allows us to go for the time being into an imaginary sanctuary, into a place where we are not alone. And this is, my friends, how nature takes care of us when needed. It's hard to get not excited. So let's go to the last part here, which is another constellation, the so-called sensory or post-sensory cortex constellation. Easy. This is the sensory cortex, post-sensory cortex, and the central area, this area here, is linked to separation conflicts. Separation from a loved one, from a partner, a spouse, a friend, a parent. The fear of such a separation can already trigger the conflict. And as soon as there are more than two or three conflicts, if there's a constellation, so right and left conflict activity, we're seeing changes. And this constellation manifests itself as short-term memory loss, of being forgetful. And this is the purpose of the constellation. The constellation allows us to forget until we are in a better position or better able to cope with the distress of the separation. It is a form, a beautiful form of protection, because in nature, a separation from an offspring, a mate, or the pack is most dramatic. So we see this behavior also in cats, because we know that from observation and studies, if kittens are taken away from the mother cat and are given back to her, she first doesn't recognize them. This is how we see this instinctive behavior. Well, if children are forgetful and have difficulties concentrating, this is called ADD, or attention deficit disorder. Dr. Hammer's research makes it very clear and leaves no doubt that children who have difficulties concentrating, who forget doing their homework, and as a result it causes learning difficulties, that they are conflict active with separation conflicts. Often this condition starts when they're separated from a parent. I don't have to say more. So what is ADHD? Oh, these letters. H stands for hyperactivity. And Dr. Hammer found what is hyperactivity? Is being restless, not being able to sit still, having this urge to move. Dr. Hammer found that this behavior is linked to a motor cortex constellation and the conflicts of feeling stuck, involving the muscles. But in case of a constellation, the child counteracts the distress with maximum movement, constant urge to move, not being able to sit still. Okay, fidgeting at the dinner table. Move, move, move. There's nothing wrong with these children. From now on, when we hear ADHD, we should not think of a disorder. We should think of separation and feeling stuck. And the stories open up right in front of us. And this is our invitation to make changes for the sake of our children. Memory loss is also a symptom of Alzheimer's. While in this age group, it is often the loss or separation of a spouse. Look how beautiful they are. Look at them. Of a long-term friend, of a partner, causing the separation conflict. And if such an elderly person is put in a senior's home or in a nursing home, we can just imagine that more conflicts of this nature are added to the situation. And if this conflict activity goes over years and years and years, this is what causes dementia. Conventional medicine considers Alzheimer's a degenerative disease. The truth is, there is nothing degenerative in people with Alzheimer's. It is our society that has been degenerating way too long. In societies and cultures where the grandparent generation is still part of the family, where they feel needed, where they play an important role in the upbringing of the grandchildren, ADD, ADHD, Alzheimer's is unheard of, because there's always somebody at home. This is the secret. So German New Medicine, Dr. Hamer's New Medicine, our new medicine, is about connecting. It's about reconnecting. It's about communicating. It's about getting along, about being there for each other, rejoicing in each other's company. It is about togetherness, and it is about oneness. And today, I would like to close my presentation with a poem. A poem composed by a spirit. It was sent to me during the time when I was preparing for today's talk about healing, rejection, and abandonment. And this is the message. You will never be abandoned or left alone when you travel with love. That is your true companion. This is your lover, your friend, your father, your mother. Your true companion is love itself. It lives within you. And when you're not afraid, this love comes to the surface of your being, and it moves out, and the world sees it, and the world loves to be with you. May love always travel with us.